Good morning and welcome. Welcome to the third in our 2020 Fridays at Neuhaus seminar series, Tips for Virtual Learning Success, presented by Evan Weinberger. My name is Mary North. I'm the director of the Family Support Office at Neuhaus. Our mission at Neuhaus is to promote reading success for all by teaching teachers to teach the science of reading, by providing information and resources to parents about reading, and providing classes for adults who want to improve their reading and spelling. Before I introduce you to Evan, I'd like to know a little bit more about you, and so would he for that matter. That's why we're doing this. We're going to have a clever little poll. So I'm going to stop that video and put up a poll and ask you to please answer some questions to let us know who's in the room. Okay, good. Well, I'm pleased to introduce a longtime friend of Neuhaus, Evan Weinberger. Evan has presented in our seminar series in the past, specifically on topics about organization, study skills, and time management. He's the president and CEO of a company he started in 2006, Staying Ahead of the Game, which now has offices in several Texas cities and in Washington, D.C. Staying Ahead of the Game is a unique academic coaching and tutoring service. Evan and his team of professionals focus on helping students build the executive functioning skills they need to be successful in the classroom and beyond the classroom. The core components of his program include teaching kids about organization, time management, and how to influence others' perception of you. Evan is here today to help us understand what our kids are up against this year at school and how we can help them succeed in the virtual world. So please join me in welcoming Evan Weinberger. That's an applause.
I love it. I love it. You guys thought you could escape our mission, but if you can't come to the Neuhaus Center, we're going to come to you. So I see some of you look like you're at home, some of you look like you're at your office, and some of you look like you're at your office, but I bet you're really at home. You just made an office at home. So we're gonna talk about that. First of all, I want to thank Neuhaus. I'm a longtime friend of Neuhaus, and they're a longtime friend of mine. When I was just getting started, they had faith in me before they should have, and I will never forget that. And so I appreciate every opportunity with Neuhaus and always will. Mary, you've been instrumental in that, and Mary is our Zoom host today. Sue's also had a big role in helping this event come together, so thank you to the two of you. I also enjoyed the time I had with your president and CEO, Tracy, on Great Day Houston with Deborah Duncan a few weeks ago, along with the superintendent of Spring Branch ISD. I believe that's searchable. If you find the Great Day Houston homepage, you can search for that. It's about 10 minutes long with some really great information. Mary went through a lot of the etiquette for today. A lot of this being a meeting was at my request. I just like to see your faces. And when it comes to Q&A, I really like for you to have the opportunity to actually ask me a question, simulating as close to in-person as we possibly can. So it's a little bit risky with a group this size, but hey, I think we can handle it. Just a few words. Mary's already talked about muting. If you have trouble, she as the host can help you mute yourself. And with regard to Q&A, I know if we were in person, you could raise your hand, you could make faces, and I could pause what I'm doing to address some of your questions in a timely fashion. My humble request is that if you have questions, I really want you to ask them. But there is a Q&A towards the end, and you will have two different mediums through which you can ask questions. If you're comfortable, I invite you to kind of walk through this little tutorial with me. On the bottom of your screens, there's a button called Participants. If you click on Participants, a window will pop up to the right, a panel. And on the bottom of that panel, you will see three buttons. One that says Invite, one that says Mute Me or Unmute Me, and another one that says Raise Hand. So that Raise Hand button is a digital way to raise your hand when the Q&A comes along. And then either myself or Mary will call on you. We will invite you to unmute your microphone and you can ask a question simulating an in-person presentation. If you're more comfortable, alternatively, as Mary mentioned, the chat is going directly to her and only to her. So that is private with her. If you would like, and it's more comfortable, you can pose your question at any point really in the presentation, and she will try to be mindful of those questions coming in, consolidate ones that are similar, and ask those questions on your behalf. Throughout the presentation, feel free, whether you'd like to be on video, fantastic. If that's uncomfortable, you don't have to. I always appreciate when speakers, everybody has a lens that represent their perspective. So I'd like to just give you a few minutes about myself so that you have a better understanding of my lens and perspective, and then the company that I created, and then we'll move into the presentation. I was diagnosed very early with ADD. Now that's not a thing anymore. There's several types of ADHD. So what ADD was before is now ADHD primarily inattentive type. I also have some auditory processing issues and reading comprehension issues. I struggled in school, but part of my problem was that I wasn't on anybody's radar. I wasn't on anybody's radar because my performance was still high. And my performance was still high out of a function of quite a bit of luck in my personal circumstances, not because I wasn't struggling. And oftentimes those students are the ones that are left behind. I was in small private schools my entire life, with pretty ready access to teachers. By the time I got to high school, I was told I could not take any AP courses because the school was concerned that they did not have the faculty to be able to accommodate my learning differences. And I use that word learning differences because I refuse to accept that I have a learning disability. I feel like I've accomplished quite a bit, and I just learn a little bit differently. I had accommodations on everything I ever did, including standardized tests, SAT, ACT, both, and then also the GRE and the MCAT for graduate school. And for any of you who have had experiences trying to help coach, whether it's your own children, patients, clients, through that process, as you matriculate and get further into school, that process becomes increasingly more difficult. And you have to show quite a history. So I had that history. I mentioned that it was quite a bit of luck as well. So I'm the oldest of three. I have two sisters that are 5 and 6 years younger. My mother was able to step away from her professional life when I was born, and I had quite a bit of attention to help me build what I know now to be, at the time, essential compensatory skills for my learning differences. I understand them now to be important executive functioning skills, and we'll talk about that quite a bit today. I have, upon graduating with degrees in biology and religious studies and deciding that I wanted to switch gears away from medical school, I had had several shadow experiences with doctors. They were frustrated about the same things, and it just wasn't the kind of path that I was interested in moving forward. So I switched gears. My father was a pretty well-known clinical psychologist, and he was a big contributor in me getting tested and my high level of awareness that my abilities cognitively were great, but because of some obstacles in my learning, that's why I was struggling. So I had a uniquely high level of awareness of that. And I believe that helped me to stay motivated, stay engaged, and to build the confidence to advocate for myself. So I mentioned my journey to where I am right now. There was definitely some luck involved, being the oldest of three and having a live-in shrink, so to speak, and then being in some small environments where I was able to sit towards the front of the room. I graduated in a class of 11, a year early from high school, actually. I lived abroad for a year in Israel, taking actual college courses at a university, living in the dorms most of the time, and trained dogs for the Israeli army for part of that time on a volunteer basis. Came back and I did my undergraduate at Rhodes College. And when I took some post-bac classes in psychology, switching away from medicine, I discovered industrial and organizational psychology, applied and gained admission into a doctoral program here in Houston for industrial and organizational psychology. My research was in polychronicity, which is a fancy word in the primary literature for multitasking or time management, as well as impression management, which is a borrowed term from the business literature that has to do with how through our behaviors, we can actually manage the impressions that others have of us about our interest, engagement, happiness to be there, you know, et cetera. And we'll talk about that too later, but that doesn't always have to be genuine. And so I think it's important to understand kind of everybody's lens. And so I wanted to give you a little bit of history there. I pivoted from my doctoral program and decided to give my full attention to this company I started in 2006 and still operate today, called Staying Ahead of the Game. I'm sure many of you are familiar with traditional tutoring. I believe that what we do is far more unique than that. While we do offer traditional tutoring services, our focus is absolutely teaching kids how to learn, and in my opinion, addressing, in many cases, the core problem. So even students presenting like they might be struggling in math, hey, that's okay. We're not good at everything. We're not wired to be good at everything. We're not naturally excellent at everything. But we need to understand that about ourselves and plan accordingly. And so while some families might be quick to get their students a math tutor in that situation, if you actually break it down, an executive functioning coach may be far more helpful, because often those problems at the foundation are really a function of poor time management, perhaps poor organization. And I meet a lot of students where their struggle is the administrative component of school. In other words, juggling all the different things that are being thrown at them, as opposed to the school itself. And even those areas that don't come as quickly to us, if we plan accordingly and we know that about ourselves, and we can give ourselves time to start earlier and use our teachers that are a resource for us, then we may not need some of those subject tutors. So we do offer traditional tutoring, but our primary focus is absolutely executive functioning skills. So with that being said, I wanted to see your faces for as long as I could, because once I start my presentation, I can't. So I'm going to start my presentation here. And thank you all for being here. Whenever I listen to presentations, I always appreciate when presenters show me an agenda. That way, if I'm having a really good time, I can manage my disappointment toward the end and kind of know when it's coming to an end, and I'm mentally prepared for that. On the flip side, if you're not having a great time, you have an idea of how much longer you have to sit still. So, so I always appreciate that. So here's an agenda. We're going to talk about executive functioning skills, starting with a definition. And then we're going to move to distance learning and how that calls upon our students' executive function skills. We'll talk about distance learning 1.0, which is what happened in March, April, and May, and 2.0, which is after the opportunity for schools, families, professionals to adjust, companies to adjust what that looks like and how it's different in 2.0 for this year. I know many of you are studying in a hybrid model. So some of you may be all virtual still, some of you may be on a hybrid model, and a few of you might be learning in other ways, but I think there's a lot of elements of that we'll discuss today that will be helpful to you. And then finally, some tips for students and parents, some tips for teachers. There's quite a bit of commingling there. And so even the tips for teachers, for example, are tips to help make teachers' lives easier and help them be more effective with their students, even virtually. But that trickles down to students as well. And even the tips for students and parents can be helpful for teachers. And I know many of you from the poll here are educators and also parents as well. So hopefully, my hope is that each of you get at least 2 or 3 things that you can begin implementing tonight that will help you with your students. Now, what is executive functioning skills, or what are executive functioning skills? Well, according to the Center of the Developing Child at Harvard University, executive function, these are the mental processes that enable us to plan, focus attention, remember instructions, and juggle multiple tasks successfully. The brain needs these skills to filter distractions, prioritize tasks, set and achieve goals and control impulses. And then here's why we're here. Executive function skills provide critical supports for learning and development. And while we are not necessarily born with these skills, we are born with the potential to develop them through interaction and practice. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here, right? So I'm very happy that you're here. Now that we're on the same page about a definition, I want to talk a little bit more, dive a little bit deeper into executive function skills. So here are some important components. This is not exhaustive, but these are some important components of executive function. Working memory that governs our ability to retain and manipulate distinct pieces of information. This working memory is particularly over a shorter period of time. Mental flexibility helps us to sustain or shift attention to be responsive. So in response to different demands, or to apply different rules in different settings. So that ability to understand, hey, I'm here, so there's one set of rules, but when I go here, there's a different set of rules. We all know that our kids seem to be better behaved, as worried as we are, because they may not be well behaved with us. They tend to be better behaved without us. So that is a real phenomenon. And then self-control enables us to set priorities, resist impulsive actions or impulsivity or responses. Now, think of executive function as the CEO of the brain. And so here's a flow. If we have a task at hand, the ability to analyze that task and then plan how you're going to address that task, and then organize the pieces of the puzzle or the things that you need or the steps involved in order to carry out that task, and then develop timelines for completing that task. And so breaking it down into more manageable chunks or components, and those steps that are involved in achieving each of those. And then adjusting those steps above needed to complete the task. So I think of those navigation systems in many of our cars now, where you get off course and it automatically kind of reroutes and adjusts. Our brains are doing that as well, and that's absolutely an executive function. And then finally, completing a task in a timely way. So think of executive function as the CEO of the brain. Now, our executive function, it happens in this frontal cortex right here. Our brains, when we're babies, develop from the back actually up to the top. And so this, unfortunately, for kiddos, and for us as parents and educators who are helping and managing those kiddos, this front part of the brain that's in charge of executive decision making and where our executive function development lies. I don't want to admit this outside this presentation, but for girls, it's a little bit sooner. Okay, that's a secret between us. For girls, it's in the mid-20s to late 20s that this front part of the brain is completely developed. For boys, it's a little bit later. It's late 20s to early 70s. I'm just kidding. It's late 20s to early 30s. And so keep that in mind. I tell you that to say that, you know, kids are not 100%, they're responsible, but maybe not 100% responsible for some of the silly decisions that they make. And so they do absolutely need our help and guidance. Now, moving on here, executive function skills, facts and myths. So I want to talk about this for a moment. So executive function disorder, which I can't see you, so I can't have you nod or raise your hand if you've heard of that, but it is not a formal diagnosis. You will not find that in the DSM-5. So executive function disorder is not a formal diagnosis. However, executive function issues do occur with other learning differences. So problems with executive function are part of the definition of many other learning differences. So whether it's ADD, ADHD, dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, certain processing disorders, oftentimes aspects of executive dysfunction are part of that definition. The exact causes of executive function issues are not known. We don't know. Anybody that tells you they do, it's a strong suspicion. We don't know. It's nothing. If your child has issues with executive function, it's not because you didn't You didn't liquefy their food and put them into ice trays when they were a baby and then defrost them one by one. Or you didn't feed them organic carrots. I mean, we don't know what the cause is. So don't beat yourself up about that. We're not sure. However, we can evaluate for executive function issues. And we can evaluate for them because we can test for them. It's part of the test for many other learning differences. We can certainly evaluate for those particular skills. We do know that genetics play a role. I have my father to thank for some of my issues, but also some of my creativity, etc. And so we do know there's a genetic component, but again, we don't understand that completely either. And then keep in mind, true executive function issues are present in all areas of life. So if a student is forgetful with binders, with homework assignments, with certain elements of a project, or but they should also be forgetful at tasks at home. If you give them a list of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 things to do at home, cleaning their room, whether it's athletic equipment and remembering to bring your athletic equipment. And so if true executive function issues should be seen in many areas of life and not be restricted to academics. If they appear to be restricted to academics, there's some different conversations that we should have. But true executive function issues should be present in all areas of life. And then finally, executive function issues can improve with practice, which again, that's why we're all here, is to come up with some creative ideas and ways, tips, tricks, and strategies on how we can help our students, whether those are our own children or the students in our classrooms or our clients, with the development of these essential executive function skills. Now, keep in mind that, well, we'll cover some signs here. So what are some signs of executive function issues? Problems with organizing thoughts and materials. So both thoughts, intangible, and materials, tangible. Difficulty ordering and prioritizing tasks. Also predicting how long certain tasks are going to take. Trouble with multi-step instructions. And so, in general, and we'll talk about this later, but, in general, lists of 2 or 3 things are generally better for kids than lists of 5, 6, or 7 things. So breaking that down into several lists can be really helpful. Focusing on unimportant points. So in a lecture, or if you're at home talking to your children and you're trying to there's a teaching moment and you're trying to teach them a lesson, and then they just continue to focus, oh, but mom, you did this, and that's the least important part of the conversation. That could be a sign of some issues with executive function. Overreacting to unexpected changes, that could be another sign of executive function issues. Giving up easily or refusing to try new things. And then finally, pervasive forgetfulness. And I say pervasive, calling upon that last slide where it's in all areas of life: morning, afternoon, evening, personal, school, for some adults, business, etc. Now, keep in mind that some of these are also signs of being a teenager. So if you have a teenager, some of these things are normal. And so there's an old adage that said, "Mama knows best." And so you need to make a judgment call on how many of these things may characterize your children, or your clients, or your patients, or students. And on a relative scale, these all fall in the gray area. They're not black and white. So on a relative scale, how bad are these compared to maybe your other children or the other children in your class, and how many of these boxes, and this is not exhaustive, just some good highlights. And then distance learning. So another reason why we're here, distance learning requires students to flex their executive function muscles in a way that they didn't need to before. These are always important skills, but the abrupt transition to virtual learning is really calling upon students to flex their executive function muscles. And so why? Let's take a look at that. Well, we're asking students to adapt. All of a sudden, their worlds were turned upside down. And it's not just students, parents are adapting, schools are adapting, counselors were adapting, even support professionals are adapting. But we're asking students to adapt, and the front part of their brain here is not fully developed yet. So we're asking them to go from what they have known their entire life to date to all of a sudden flipping the whole education paradigm almost upside down, And now they're working, which is school. So they're working where they live at home, as opposed to being able to walk through the doors at school and go into kind of a work or productive mode. Now we're asking them to adapt. And it's far deeper than it may seem on the surface. The way that teachers are teaching is different. The tools that they're using are different. The resources they have at their disposal are different. The environment is different. The way that teachers disseminate homework or information to students is different. The way that they turn in assignments are different. So there's a lot there in adapting. Planning and prioritizing, of course, is different. Scheduling, wow, that's very different. It used to be a kid's life was in the morning, their alarm would ring. If it rang 2 or 3 times and they still weren't getting up, mom or dad would kind of come and drag them out of bed, right? And then you go to enter those doors at school and go to the first class. And whether you're completely in tune or not, at that point, you would follow the herd when the bell rings to the next class and kind of rinse, repeat throughout the day. And then you come home, perhaps after some athletics or some sports, do a little bit of homework, shower, eat dinner, and then go to bed and do it again the next day. As far from a scheduling standpoint, students didn't have to do a tremendous amount of scheduling on their own. Now, all of a sudden, there almost is no schedule. At least last year, there was truly no schedule. The schools were going back and forth, and so it's on the students to be able to conduct themselves, be flexible, et cetera, in this new paradigm. Organizing, even that looked different, and we'll talk about this later too, but binders are still important, but are decreasing in importance, and e-binders are increasing in importance. So while students were organizing a lot of papers and handouts and worksheets, now all of a sudden, rather than organizing things that they can touch and feel, they're organizing digital files that never actually see paper. And so organizing on their computers and naming things appropriately. So we'll get to that more in a moment. Initiating, meeting deadlines, is different. So initiating, I want to talk about that. Initiating can be more difficult too. At school, it's easier to initiate. There's this idea of shared suffering or social motivation. You're in a work environment, you turn to your left and somebody's working, you turn to your right, somebody's working. So trouble initiating and actually getting started when you're alone and by yourself and isolated, that's hard for kids. Meeting deadlines. That's particularly difficult outside of the school environment. And then self-advocating. It used to be that teachers could look around the classroom and you could just see certain students just had this glaze over their face of gosh, I need help. And even if they didn't know how to ask for it, you could see it as a teacher, as a parent, you could see that they needed help. That is different. And students are needing to advocate for themselves and ask for that help, and not every student is comfortable with that. And then controlling impulses is that the world of controlling impulses is a bit different when you are having class on a screen and you look over here and it's your kitchen instead of another classroom full of other students who are working. And so that becomes more difficult as well. Doing all of these things well is absolutely a function of executive functioning skills. And so this virtual environment, the abrupt transition, certainly called upon students and their executive function skills. Some problems with distance learning we experienced last year, and I'm not faulting schools. Gosh, bless their hearts, they had to transition very abruptly. So I am not faulting schools for their approach. I really believe wholeheartedly that students, schools, and educators did the absolute best that they could. But the circumstances created some troubles, troubles with training teachers and administrators and students and their parents quickly on these new ways to teach, these new ways to deliver assignments to kids, these new ways to turn in assignments, etc. Virtual classroom controls were an issue, and restricting unwanted guests. And so, a lot of, in Zoom, you can draw pictures on presenters' faces, etc. and kids were doing that, of course, and drawing pictures on their teachers' faces, and a lot of the controls and the IT teams at different schools and organizations kind of hadn't streamlined the way to control all of that yet. And then a few schools had problems with unwanted guests. So where you have technology, you have anti-technologists, so to speak, like the black hat IT folks who are hacking, et cetera. And so we had some problems with some schools where there were unwanted guests coming in and saying and doing all kinds of things that were inappropriate. Monitoring student progress was problematic. Fairness to all students. So, public and private schools, there's at every school, there's a subset of folks who are privileged and overprivileged, and then folks who are in underserved areas who are resource constrained. And so how do I still don't know the answer, and I still go to sleep at night struggling with this, but how do we handle that when there are some families that don't have fast enough internet in order to be able to handle the education in this new paradigm, and they don't have the tools and resources that other students have? And so how do we be fair to all students? So that was another problem that we experienced in the abrupt transition. And then best practices, since this was new, I'm a data person. I have a science head, so I always like to look at information and data. Well, we couldn't exactly look at the last 3 pandemics. This is what we did, and this worked better than this, and we didn't have that. Even talking to the oldest people that I know and wisest people that I know, this was new to them, and so this was new all around and presented all kinds of issues. And unfortunately, the result of that, which was unintended, but the result of that was many schools let kids out early just for the summer. Some schools tried to go to school all day and then realized kids are on screens all day, and that's not good. So they consolidated their synchronous learning to the mornings. That a lot of schools did away with grades or turned things into pass fail, or said we won't let your grades this semester hurt you, and if we'll take your grade from third quarter and replicate that for fourth quarter if your fourth quarter grade is poor. And then of course, kids responded to that by feeling like a lot of their work was optional. In many cases, there were no penalties for overdue assignments or turning things in late, or even not showing up to class. Once again, in order to be fair to all students, because it's hard to be judgmental on each individual student's circumstances. And so it was quite a problem, last year. However, 2.0, we had all summer to train teachers and have development programs for teachers and for IT departments to figure out how to restrict unwanted guests and how to streamline some of the controls, so that teachers didn't have to fear as they were teaching that somebody was kind of drawing on their faces, and et cetera. Also, the counseling departments figured out kind of new ways to support students virtually and from a distance. So while they were always available and the desire was there to help, there was no streamlined way to deliver that help. And so all of that, the few months of summer gave schools and organizations the ability to kind of think through that and figure that out. So 2.0 is has been smoother, but let's be honest, we are making the best tasting lemonade that we can from lemons. If virtual school was optimal, we would have switched to that direction as a society 5 years ago or more, when fast internet was in most of our homes. And for the folks who didn't have it, we could have figured out a way to get them those resources that they needed. And so if it was better, we would have done that a long time ago. So I think that's one thing in an environment where it's hard to agree on anything these days, in the political environment that we're in. I think that's one thing we can all agree on as educators and even non-educators, is that this is certainly a suboptimal situation. Now, tips. So tips for students and parents here. First, a home classroom. So I believe that this is absolutely essential. So first, I want to talk about a location. So building a classroom at home is critical. And so where should that location be, and what should it look like? So that location in the home, a place that's not too noisy, but interestingly, also not too quiet. If both can be distracting. We never, ever, ever recommend students doing work in the bedrooms. And so we strongly encourage, and actually a lot of schools now have policies where kids cannot work in their bedrooms, like on Zoom for virtual learning. But I don't think anything productive really happens in the bedroom. The outcome is one of two things. We have programmed ourselves and spent our lifetime to date programming ourselves when we are in the same area or vicinity as a bed to get tired. We have programmed ourselves to do that, which is a good thing. Sleep is really, really important, and that's a whole nother topic and seminar. But sleep is absolutely essential, and so we are programmed to get tired when we see a bed, whether you realize it or not, even if it's in your peripheral vision or you're just nearby. And so working in the bedroom is going to have one of two outcomes. Either you're going to be tired and students are not going to absorb everything that they should be absorbing, and certainly not working at maximum efficiency, and their retention and recall will suffer because they're tired. Alternatively, students untrain themselves to the studying that they do works, and they stay up and they do their work and complete it, but they start untraining themselves to get tired when they see a bed, which is also bad, because then they sit in their bed when they should be sleeping and are not able to go to sleep. And so since both outcomes are bad, we highly recommend never having students work in the bedroom. So a place that's not too noisy, a place that's not too quiet, natural light. So I don't want to get into a science lesson here, but right back here in our brains, we produce this hormone called melatonin, which makes us tired. And we are pre-programmed to produce melatonin through a negative feedback inhibition loop. Natural sunlight coming through our eyes sends a message, a signal to this back part of the brain to stop producing melatonin. It's called a negative feedback inhibition loop. And then when that production of melatonin stops, it stops making us tired, and therefore we feel awake. And so natural light, doing work when there's natural light outside and in a place in the home where there is natural light coming in, will help our productivity tremendously. Good ventilation is really important. Of course, also best practices with COVID, et cetera. A strong internet connection is absolutely essential. And there are some pretty simple and inexpensive tools. If a certain room that would be otherwise ideal does not have a strong internet connection, spreading that internet connection to that room and fixing that is a pretty simple fix. I've got a wonderful IT guy. There's nothing in it for me. I'm happy to make an introduction, but if you know somebody, those tools are not particularly expensive. Accessible power outlets, so almost everything has a screen and beeps and dings now. And so having a lot of outlets, or if there's not a lot of outlets, getting like an extension cord of sorts with 6 extra outlets is helpful. And then a printer nearby is important. There's even in a world where a lot of work is not seeing paper, it doesn't mean that students can't print certain things and then draw arrows, underline, highlight, hole punch, name and date it, and keep it in a binder. And so especially for students with learning differences, but I think all students would benefit from interacting with paper whenever possible. And then supplies in that home classroom. So of course there's some obvious supplies like pens and pencils, highlighters and erasers, but a hole puncher and stapler, I tell kids those are married, just like salt and pepper. And so a hole puncher and stapler should have a home in the house. And it should be a specific hole puncher and stapler just for the kids, and they can always depend on it being there. And if you take them away from there, you always take them together and then always return them to that place. Paper note cards, sticky notes, a dry erase board or a cork board or something to be able to write down kind of major assignments or dates or map out certain things while you're studying, et cetera, is really helpful. And those aren't terribly expensive. A device stand. And so oftentimes, I guess all of us are in more and more Zoom meetings. We see situations, kind of like this, right? And so those are easy fixes with a device stand that props up your device and your camera. a few inches. And so a device stand, again, Amazon has some great options and they're pretty cheap. A fidget toys or jump rope. I mean, keeping the body moving is really important, especially during short brain breaks, which we'll get to in a moment here. But you know, some fidget toys or a jump rope can be really helpful, especially for students where their learning obstacles may be attention related. Noise canceling headphones is something that sometimes we don't think about, but that can be really helpful in order to mitigate some of the other noise in the house with parents who still may be working at home, or other siblings who may be working at home, or even in the same room if that's the classroom at home. Snacks and a water bottle, staying hydrated and keeping those blood sugar levels up and feeding the brain. I think that's pretty important. A calculator, and then a visual timer. Gosh, these are fantastic, and I'm using one right now myself. This particular one is called a time timer. They retail for about 40-45 bucks, but you can get them on Amazon pretty much all day long in the $20 to $30 range. They are not the kind of annoying beeping kind of kitchen timers. These are intended for focus and are blessed by a lot of teacher organizations. So I think every household should have several. I have one in almost every room. I even set it for 3 minutes when my 6-year-old son brushes his teeth. Daily structure. So schedule. A schedule is really, 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 really important. And if the school is not providing the schedule like they used to, because we are virtual learning or distance learning, spending some time to create a schedule for wake up times, planning and prioritizing time. So this is planning time is 15 minutes kind of going through Canvas or the portal, whatever the school's portal may be, and writing down a list of here are all the things coming up for the next couple days, and then starring those things that are due the next day, et cetera. That planning time is really important and should be a part of the schedule and should be done every day. The synchronous and asynchronous learning time. So every school has kind of responded differently and has a different schedule. I think it's really important to have those synchronous and asynchronous learning times. The asynchronous would be more like homework and things that students are doing on their own time, but building that into a daily schedule is really important. Meal times and breaks, of course. Physical activity. Kids need to keep their bodies moving and the juices flowing. Social interaction, even in a world where it's a little taboo to have social interaction. I don't necessarily mean in person, but you can even do in person. Even kids, 2 or 3 other families or neighbors who are being, a little bit more responsible, and you can keep a few feet of distance in the front yard or the backyard. So even in person is possible, but sometimes we can scratch that need, that itch, that need for social interaction through like a FaceTime or a Skype or a group call. And FaceTime, you can do a group FaceTime now. So sometimes even that interaction, and I hate to use the word video games, but for certain age groups, even allowing a restricted time for video games, there's a social component to that as well for kids that are involved in video games. So again, video game limits and technology limits and digital diets is a whole other lecture. But sometimes kids can scratch that itch there as well, responsibly. Time to reflect on the day. Make sure that everything that you wrote on during your planning and prioritizing session is crossed out for the day, etc. Going to sleep is really important. That sleep time is really important. So having a consistent time that students are going to sleep, even on the weekends, even if that time is a little bit later, but just having some consistency there is really important. And dress for success, I thought this was worth mentioning. There is a tremendous amount of research that the way that we dress has an impact on our attention, on our presentation, impression management, et cetera, et cetera. So it helps us focus, it impacts behavior, it enhances motivation, and can improve achievement. Organization. So creating a place for everything, paper and digital. And so binders and e-binders, I want to say what I mean by that. So we have this wonderful binder system that we use. And this binder system has dividers, but within each divider, which is a subject, there are these subdividers. Now, I know you can't see that very well, unfortunately, doing this virtually, But all of the supplies that we use that represents our favorites from doing this for 15 years with students, and putting together 1 or 2 binders with several subjects in each class, we have compiled into this really cool Amazon ideas list. And so if anybody would like a link to that list, again, there's nothing in it for me. It's all on Amazon, but it's a private shopping cart. And so I'm happy to share that with you as a courtesy for anyone that comes to my lectures. So if my contact information is going to be in a later slide, feel free to reach out for that and only that. Totally fine. And we're happy to share that link with you, and you can get those supplies. Now, binders used to be really, 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 really important. Now I would say they're just really important. And what's rising in importance are e-binders, which is how students are organizing themselves in this new digital environment. So where they are storing their files, whether it is a cloud-based system like Google Drive, which automatically saves everything into the cloud, or whether it's a system like Dropbox or Box.com or iCloud. But we want to make sure that students are storing their important files in an area that's safe. The only thing worse than losing your computer to breakage or loss or theft or something like is losing all of your important files too. And so we like to take a look at where students are storing all of their files, and cleaning up any kind of loose icons on their desktop and old files. Instead of going through and sorting them all, oftentimes we'll create a folder called old and just kind of throw everything in there, and then create a folder structure that's named appropriately. In Google Drive, you can actually back click on folders and color code them, which is always wonderful. And so we try to talk to students about their e-binders. And so sitting with your students and helping them to organize their e-binders, naming their files meaningfully with a certain kind of nomenclature. We're also encouraging students to, at least, if not their names, put their initials in all the file names. So when they're submitting them to teachers, that teachers can easily distinguish their work from other students, that's good practice. Color coding dividers and computer folders. Digital files should be stored safely in a cloud. Title and name everything meaningfully. Now, some efficiencies. All critical supplies should be within arm's reach. So, whether it's in containers, but, in that classroom, keep extra of all of the supplies students could possibly need to be successful, and think of what they would have at their fingertips in their classroom, and make sure that their home classroom has many of those same things. Use browser bookmarks for frequently accessed sites. And so that's pretty straightforward, to create bookmarks for like your school portal, or if there are certain websites that you use in certain classes frequently, help your student to create some bookmarks there. Add common applications to the dock. I think that's what it's called on a Mac. I'm sure that on a PC there may be another name, but there's kind of a dock as shortcuts to access some programs and applications that are used frequently. And then I always recommend that students take a few minutes, and you can help them, as whether you are a therapist, another professional, whether you are a teacher or a parent, you can help those kids to spend a few minutes and gather all of their teachers' contact information, maybe some other important folks in their support circle like counselors, classmates, or coaches and tutors, and put all of that information in. You can laminate it, not laminate it, but kind of put it somewhere in the classroom that's accessible. There's a lot of research that the fewer steps that are involved in doing something, the more likely we are to do it. And so that cuts out a few steps in order to reach out to teachers. If you just have all of their contact information kind of right there, it helps make it easier for students to advocate for themselves when they need it. Now, tips for teachers. Expectations. So because this new world and environment has changed the way that we communicate, the way that we share assignments, the way that we accept assignments, et cetera, those key class functions. If you're an educator, go very clearly from day one, and if I know day one is over, but as quickly as possible, if you haven't already, dedicate some time to specifically going through how students are to receive work from you and how they are to submit it back to you completed. and walk them through it. Share a screen, create a video tutorial. Loom is a great program to create kind of short videos, and you're kind of like on the bottom left or right, and then they can see your screen and hear you talking. For educators, you can fill out this form, and they give you a pro account for free. Monitoring grade performance. Show students how they can monitor on a regular basis how they are performing in the class if the school has that back-end system set up, and show them how to do that, and what timeframes they can expect to have feedback. That's important too. And then logging into important class sites. Actually share your screen and log in front of them and show them how to do it. I have no idea how many students we've worked with where you might have been really clear in your class, but then they come home and they just forget it all. And so showing them a lot of the time, that is really helpful. And then organization expectations. And so if you would like for them to create a folder on their computer, tell them that. If you want them to create these 3 subfolders on their computer, tell them that too. If you want them to have certain sections in their binder, be specific and tell them exactly what sections. And I think that will help to keep the kids organized, etc. Etiquette, whatever etiquette that you require for your class with regard to muting and unmuting during distance learning sessions, etc. Even if you're a therapist and doing distance therapy sessions or virtual therapy sessions, you have a brief discussion about etiquette. I mean, these are different, and we're all adjusting, and sometimes you don't know unless somebody tells you what their expectations are. Otherwise, you're guessing. Class participation. Tell them what class participation looks like in your mind in a virtual environment, so that they know what you're expecting. I was dealing with a situation with a student the other day who didn't have his video on during class, and the teacher perceived that as he must have been kind of messing around and perhaps not in front of his computer, and didn't realize that there was an expectation there that you needed to keep your video on, and then he was happy to do it. So it was a minor adjustment, but it was it went on for an unnecessarily long amount of time. Appropriate attire, and so I know a lot of schools are requiring certain uniform or certain attire, not being in the bedroom, etc. And so reinforce that and be clear about that. And then policies for asking the teacher for help. Say the best way to reach me is, and it could be through Canvas, it could be through email, it could be, but it differs from class to class. And so be specific on what you are expecting from your teachers, from your students as far as communication. Late and missing work, if those policies are not abundantly clear, go over those so everybody's on the same page. And then accommodations, if students are receiving accommodations and the way that looks may be different in a virtual environment, make sure that you are proactive in going through that with those students so they're not fearful of asking for those accommodations. And then consistency, I believe, is really important. We are creatures of habit, and kids really need consistency. So keep a routine. Educators share daily objectives with approximate durations. Today, we're going to cover these 3 or 4 things. I'm going to spend 20 minutes on this. I'm going to spend 10 minutes on this, and then we'll finish up with 10 to 15 minutes about this and answer any questions. I mean, have kind of a plan or roadmap for the day, and that can help kids who have trouble with focus to stay focused in the same way that I've got this timer near me. Use a visual timer to stay on track. They make that timer actually makes a larger version for the classroom, which I don't have next to me to show you, but is also available on Amazon. It's a few bucks more, but it's fantastic. They even have magnets on the back, so you can put them like on the board in the front. And so keep to that. If you said we're going to go through this for about 20 minutes, set that timer for 20 minutes, and they can see visually in the background how much longer we're going to be spending on this topic. Maintain a semi-consistent flow to the class. And so if you always start with a warm-ups, always start with a warm-up without fail. Try to finish a few minutes early in order to allow students to organize their things, put things away, etc. Follow through, keep portals current. So try your very, very hardest. If you tell them you're going to give them feedback, or be consistent about when you write homework and assign homework on the portals so that they can expect when to look for information. And that feedback, that prompt feedback, as promptly as you can is really important, but set that expectation. I'd rather under promise and over deliver than kind of give them feedback late. And it's going to also cause some issues with parents. Update grades as soon as possible. Communication, clear, frequent, and thorough. Not much more to say about that, but I think that when families are going to have lots of questions right now, especially if their kids are struggling, and the more that you can reference emails that you sent or lesson plans that you made available to the students, the more that you can do that, the better, and the fewer questions you're going to get from parents. And then finally here, keep it spicy. So student engagement, maybe consider an extra credit assignment and have students where they submit their home classroom setup and offer them some extra credit or even recognition. It doesn't always have to be about points. It could just be special recognition, but challenge them to create their home classrooms and maybe submit a picture of their setup. Allow time for writing in planners. Oftentimes that's that 60 seconds or 90 seconds might be the difference between actually getting assignments back or not. And so that can be really important. Student-driven teaching and presentations. It's harder for students to stay engaged in a virtual environment. So if you have a way to maybe transfer the teaching burden to them for a certain topic, or let them teach or present certain aspects, it helps to keep the kids engaged. And then if students can give each other feedback, Zoom and some other programs have like breakaway session abilities. And so that can be helpful where students can give each other feedback. Keep kids moving. You don't need to teach the entire session. I don't mean end early. I mean, you can send kids away, perhaps even outside to go grab something, or hey, grab these 3 things around your house. And now we're going to do a creative writing paragraph where you, what are the 3 things? Okay, wonderful. I got a toothbrush, I got some pepper, and I got a mug. Okay, now we're going to do a creative writing assignment where we're going to, and it has to end with, and this is how I save the world, or something like that. But it's a way to get the kids out of their chairs and moving. And so you don't have to teach the entire time. Break for stretching, hydration, bio breaks. Ask students to gather, I went through that. Positive reinforcement. Now this is really important. You guys all remember, those of you who are professionals and also parents, those of you who are parents, those of you who are educators and parents, positive reinforcement is so much stronger than negative reinforcement. There's a whole field of psychology, positive psychology. It's unbelievably important, especially for developing children, where this front part of the brain is still developing. They are going to respond best to positive reinforcement. And we can all remember when the kids were really young and they were at that kind of the edge of the coffee table, about to take their first steps. And they had that big-headed idea one day, I'm going to walk to the other end of the couch, from the coffee table to the other end of the couch. And so they have these kind of wobbly knees. Work with me here, guys. Have these kind of wobbly knees, and they're kind of shaking. They eye the end of the couch. Maybe they look at you. They look back. Today's the day. They take 1 step, 2 steps, and they fall. And so think about how you responded as a parent. You did not say, gosh, Charlie, you idiot. If you would have just waited 3 more weeks, developmentally, you would have been at a point where you could have taken that 3rd step and made it to the other end of the couch. What's wrong with you? Of course we didn't say that. We were cheerleaders. We were unbelievably positive. We went into, I'm going to age some of you, but we're going to go into your Rolodex and call everybody you know, right? You pull out your Olympus digital camera before we had these iPhones, and you try to take pictures. Oh, come on, Charlie, do it again. You got this, right? And so recognizing effort whenever possible will help foster a growth mindset. If that's an unfamiliar term, Google it. That's a whole other seminar, but really important to do everything we can to foster a growth mindset. And children need positivity and encouragement, especially in these changing times now more than ever. Partner with parents. Educators, I think that if you partner with the parents, you're going to minimize a lot of the emails that you're going to get in this changing environment. Parents are anxious, of course. This has been an adjustment for them too. So you can reduce parent anxiety by doing the following. go through with parents, maybe even create a little Loom video or similar to Loom type of video, going through some of those same things you went through with the students. All parents are wondering, they were already having trouble figuring out how to support their students when school was pre-COVID was so much different than what it used to be when you went to school. Now with COVID, it changed again, like even 3 more degrees different. And so parents are really struggling on how they can know their kids are turning things in, help them to find things. So if you can create a video or something to share in a very clear way to parents, how students are receiving things, how to they're expected to submit things to you for grading, how parents can monitor their child's progress without calling you or emailing you all the time, class policies and expectations about tardiness, accommodations, et cetera. Preferred way to contact you. So if it's easiest for you for parents to email you, tell them that. They won't know that unless you tell them that. So be very clear about those instructions. And then, I tell parents, make a plan now for students who are struggling. So I tell educators, there will be students in your class who struggle. That was true pre-COVID, and that's definitely going to be true now. And so have a plan of what you're going to do with and for those students who are struggling. And you can pre-think about that, and then just, you can press the button and put it into action when a student begins to struggle. So I encourage educators to do that. Just a moment about us. I've got 60 academic coaches and tutors at my Houston office. We work primarily one-on-one with students, first and foremost on their executive function skills, but also do some traditional tutoring as well. We have some special support that's 360-degree support, special for this school year, where we're offering whether it is coaching, teaching, accountability, tutoring, facilitating, mentoring. It's really a 360-degree approach to helping students right now, and monitoring their accountability, and also supplemental enrichment for filling in learning gaps. So it's no secret, the normal summer slide, we're talking about that like a summer avalanche this year, almost like summer started a couple months early. And so there are some learning gaps, and schools are doing the best that they can to help fill those. But for some students, especially students with learning differences in certain classes, they got really far behind. Now, in some classes, it may not matter as much. For example, if you didn't master ancient Chinese pottery in your world cultures class, and then you're doing U.S. history next year, I mean, it might not be so. They may not suffer so much, right? Because it's a different topic. But for some classes that are more cumulative in nature, like math and some of the sciences and reading and writing, to the extent that there's learning gaps, we're doing a lot of enrichment, supplemental enrichment, and filling in learning gaps. And then pods, we have some pods going. It's usually 3 to 5, 3 to 6 students, and again, teaching, coaching, tutoring, facilitating. For kids as young as kindergarten, and even of course through 12th grade, but even in college. And we have some additional safety precautions due to COVID, but we are working primarily in person. So in the event that we're able to help anyone, feel free to keep our information close. We're happy to talk to anyone that could benefit from our services. And then I'll leave this up for a minute. Stay in touch. I hope that these were some helpful tips. We also put some tips up on our Instagram, which is at SAOTG, on our Facebook, which is facebook.com/stayingaheadofthegame. And then you can reach us anytime via email at info@saotg.com if you want the link to the Amazon school supplies, or have any follow-up questions after the presentation today. Please make a note of this contact information. Also want to have a mention about our newsletter. We have a monthly newsletter. We do not sell email addresses, contact information, etc. It's just to help, just like this function today. We just want to help. So we have additional tips that are timely throughout the school year that we send out in a monthly newsletter. If there's something really, really big that happens, we might send out one additional one that we call a special edition. But feel free to send us an email and we can add you to the list. You can also add yourself to the list, and I'll tell you where you can do that actually. If you go to our on our website here at saotg.com, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you can also add yourself to our newsletter, and it's a one-click unsubscribe if it's not helpful. But we'd love to stay in touch. And finally, since the chat is private and going only to the host, if you'd like to put your email address in there, the host will share those emails with us, and we can follow up with you and add you to the newsletter that way as well. So thank you guys very, very, very much. I know we're here because we love kids. My 6-year-old, I'm tired because my 6-year-old last night crawled into bed with us, and then of course bumped into me and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Daddy, can you please scoot over? I need some more personal space." And so I don't know where these kids think that. I was like, "This is my space, buddy. This is my bed." So I am tired, but listen, we are here because we all have stories like that. We love the kids. For us who are educators, we love that there is a group of students that walk into our classroom, even our virtual classroom, every single day, and they know more when they leave that day than when they walked in. And that's what gets our juices flowing. And so, and for parents who can relate to the story with the couch and the first steps, we love kids, and that's why we're here. And I feel like I don't work a day in my life because I love it too. So thank you so much for being here. I truly, truly, truly hope that every one of you were able to take at least a couple things from today and implement them tonight. We're going to move into our question and answer. Mary.
Oh, this is my applause. That's what we miss in the real stuff is applause. We need some applause. Thank you so much, Evan. Honestly, being more specific about executive function, I certainly know something about it, but you did a very good job of helping me understand the why of why my grandson in particular is having trouble with all of this, and it's also giving us some real specifics about helping us remember what we need to remember and learn what we need to do to make this successful, because it's not going away. So everything's good. I do have one question here. So you want to go ahead and give your spiel about the raising hands part, and then I'll read the one question that I do have here.
Yeah, so just a review. You have two ways to handle questions here. So if you click on the bottom where it says participants, it will open up a panel to the right. On the bottom, there should be a few buttons. Furthest to the right or close to it is a button that says raise hand. And so if you are feeling courageous and would like to ask a question live here in person, please raise your hand and I will notice you, or Mary will notice you, and then you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Alternatively, if it's more comfortable, you can send a private message to the host, which is Mary, and she will ask your question on your behalf. And listen, I'm free until about 7:30 p.m., so ask away, guys.
Well, let's just start with this one from Christine. She says, I have a question for Evan. Yes. I have a 9th grade daughter who was diagnosed with dyslexia, auditory processing, and short-term memory deficits. She's studying remotely right now. She has depended on having her peers nearby for questions and clarifications on information that may be missed in class. As someone who has also navigated auditory processing ideas to help her problem, wait a minute. As someone who also navigates auditory processing, any ideas you have to help with her problem would be helpful.
Sure. So I actually am a big believer in this shared suffering or social motivation, concept. And so I am seeing a lot of families mimic that. If she really benefited from having a few students alongside her, make that classroom at home one of, large enough to where with a safe few feet of distance, you can have a couple classmates there. In fact, those other parents will love you for for doing that. And you can mimic that a similar environment where she has a couple friends. Now, those should be carefully selected of folks who perform as well as her or better. So have some confidence that it's a good influence. But I'm a big, that's how I got personally, I got through college. Everybody at IHOP knew who I was because I got a big table just for myself. I always brought a peer or two. We never had the same classes in common. We were working on our own things. I guess occasionally we had one class in common. And when they screwed up an order of pancakes, they would just bring it over, and we were like the in-house disposal. And they would just bring it over, and I just sat and drank coffee and sat there for hours and did work. But I did it. It was still almost, there was a social element. I did it with others. So feel free to mimic if that worked well. Feel free to mimic that and see if there's a couple peers that could come over at least a few days a week, and they can do school with headphones on for the synchronous learning, but kind of be around each other and still offer each other some of that support. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. And as I'm answering more questions, if something else comes to mind, I'll chime in again.
Here's another one from Carrie. Any advice on how to help ADHD kids with strong impulsivity issues to improve their self-control? Meds help, but it's still a challenge.
Sure. So that's, you're right, it's still a challenge. There are some ADHD specific tips with regard to learning that I think are helpful. Number one, of course, it's really important for those students away from school to be moving their bodies a lot. That physical activity can help to make those non-physical school requiring focus times, a bit easier. So make sure that they are very, very unusually active when they're not in school, and I think that will help. This time timer here, I think, can be a really, really, really helpful tool.
Show that closer. What is a time timer?
So a time timer, it literally has one button on the front, and you can increase the time or decrease the time, and it automatically just starts working. And the red goes away as the time goes away or elapses. And then there's one button on the back, which you can't see, that just basically says, do you want it to ding when it's over or not? And these are really, really helpful. The latest research says that in 2020 here, this is actually done, I believe, late 2018, but in the modern era here, modern world, these days, so to speak, the latest research indicates that we can focus 100% of our attention, our full attention, for 1 minute for every year of age. 1 minute for every year, and this is true for adults too. And so for a kid who is, I don't remember, if it was a ninth grader, but for a kid that's like 15, they should be able to set a timer for 15 minutes and focus 100% of their attention for that full 15 minutes. And then they need what we call a brain break. Now, a brain break could be 10 jumping jacks and sitting back down. It could be going into the other room, and I say the other room, to check their text messages or something for a few minutes and coming back. It could be going to the bathroom and coming back. It could be getting a small snack. It could even be just switching subjects so that you're using a different part of your brain, and that gives the part of your brain that you were using a break. And then another tip is, I always found it helpful for myself to manage my own ADHD, and a lot of our students find it helpful too, is to keep it spicy by switching places. And so what I mean by that is, if you have 40 pages of reading to do, consider doing 10 pages in the classroom at home, and then 10 pages sitting at the bottom of the stairs, and then 10 pages sitting in the breakfast room, and then the last 10 pages back into the classroom. And kind of changing up that environment a little can be, actually very helpful for kids with ADHD. So I hope that's helpful.
Good. Here's one from Gail. She's asking, what was the other word for the study of multitasking? Poly something.
So polychronicity is in the primary literature. It's a term that has to do with multitasking, and I'll give you a spoiler, and the spoiler is nobody can multitask well. very, like 99% of the population cannot truly multitask. Most people don't understand what the word multitask really means. It doesn't mean that you have a lot of stuff going on. It literally means working on several things at the exact same time, not having lots of projects going on at the same time. And so it literally means like filling out a vocabulary on your computer and at the exact same time talking to your mother on the phone. And most people, they see a decrease in productivity and efficiency on both fronts. And so very, very, very few people, like to the tune of 1%, can actually do that and do it well. So polychronicity is and as opposed to monochronicity.
Aha. Okay, good. Here's one from Robert. My question's about planners. What are the best types for high school, and what are the best practices for implementing them?
So my approach to planners is the following. I'm going to go completely unrelated for a second. So the most popular camera in the world is a smartphone, like an iPhone, right? It is not the best camera. By a long shot, it's not the best camera. And my wife said when we got married, when you get married, you have to buy a red KitchenAid mixer. And I said, okay. And we bought a red KitchenAid mixer. And then she said, when you have children, you need to buy a fancy camera. So when we had our first kid, we bought a really fancy camera. And it's left the drawer 3 times. And 2 of those times were to lend it to somebody else because I was just so frustrated that it didn't get used. I tell you that story to say that sometimes the best tool is the one that you'll actually use. And so I could tell you what my favorite planner is, but it doesn't matter. It could be the best planner in the world, but if it's not, it might not be the best one for you or for your kid, because the best planner for your kid is the one that he or she is going to use. Even if it's not the best planner, that's still the best planner for your kid. So I care less about what planner they use. In fact, I default to the school's planner for the schools that offer them because it has the unique special days off for that school, parent-teacher conferences, development days, holidays, et cetera. I care a lot more about how students use their planner. And by the way, if you don't get a school planner and you buy one on Amazon, then make sure that you search academic planner. They're just laid out a little bit differently than like if you just search planner. And it's more the academic year. So it'll be from, it'll be like August to August or July to July, as opposed to January through December. So if you do buy a non-school planner, make sure that it's that you search academic planner. But we care a lot more about how kids use their planner. So we talk about being very specific. So don't just put bookwork. Put page 323, numbers 1 through 11. Be very specific. For tests, you can write a capital T and circle it, or for quizzes, you can write a Q and circle it. For worksheet, you can write WS 3-4, odds or something like that. And so we try to encourage kids to write something next to every class every day in their planner, even if it's none, even write none as opposed to leaving it blank. And then cross things out when you're done, star things that are due the next day. If something is longer term, break it down into smaller chunks and put each of those chunks separately into your planner. So we care a lot more about how kids use their planner as opposed to what planner they use. I was working with a girl, who is it, Erin Condren, who makes those like really fancy girly planners. Anyway, she really wanted this really pretty planner, and she has 7 highlighters in different colors, and okay, and that was the only one she would use. And you know what? So that's the planner I recommended for her, because I couldn't get her to use any other planner. So I hope that helps.
Good. Excuse me. Good. Excuse me. There's something in the way of my thing. Okay. For Joyce is asking, how do we teach kids and adults to accurately estimate the time it will take for them to complete a task? I am personally interested in the answer to this question.
So this is one of those truths in life that kids will always bite off more than they can chew, and so they will always underestimate, right? They will always say, "Oh, I could do that in like 10 minutes," and it takes an hour, right? The key is having that follow-up discussion. So It's the short answer to your question is guess and check and learn from experience. And so go through the process of going through everything, estimating how much time they think it's going to take, and then have them actually time themselves doing it. And then when they start seeing that it takes 2 or 3 times longer consistently on almost everything than they were projecting, then that's a great learning opportunity to sit down and say, okay, well, have you noticed a trend here? I have. Let's talk about that, and maybe whatever you think it's going to be, let's put double the amount. And you know what? If you have, the worst that'll happen is you'll have extra time on your hands. You'll finish early. And maybe you can make that even into a game where you try to finish early, and so that's my approach to doing that. But the kids, I don't want to say I set them up to fail, but they always misproject what that time is going to be. And I sort of create that and let that happen because I think it's a great learning moment. It's a great teaching moment.
That's a good example of being specific about something that seems so obvious, and yet I never really thought about making it that kind of a game, which I think that sounds valuable and doable. Okay, here's one from Tara. For younger kids in elementary, how many of these executive function skills should the parent assist versus pressing the children to learn these on their own? Right now, we're in a full-time virtual school, and there are so many challenges for my elementary student with ADHD, dyslexia, and dysgraphia. I feel I'm doing so much to help compensate, but should I make more of an effort to learn these for him to learn these skills independently, or is it okay to help at these younger ages?
So consistently, research is still telling us that modeling is one of the most powerful tools for learning transfer. And so I believe model, and keep modeling, model. How much more time we got? Model, model. Model. The more you can model for the kids, the better. And you know what? They're going to learn so much from you that you don't even realize. Some things you want them to learn and you're proud of, and some things they're going to learn from you that you are not so proud of. When we work with families, oftentimes I give parents homework because I walk in and they call me and they say, "Oh, my kid is so disorganized. I can't even see their desk. This is unbelievable. I don't know how they get anything done. It's a miracle that even 3 things got in last week. Forget the 5 that were missing. That 4 of the teachers emailed me. I walk into the house, and the first thing I see is the study on the right, and that's the parents' desk, and the parents' desk is all over the place, and it's every single character. They characterize their own desk just like their students' desk. So I look at their desk and I can't see it, and there's papers all over. There's stacks and stacks and sticky notes everywhere, and and so I walk in and I say, listen, I'm going to give you homework as well, because you can't expect your kids to deliver something that you can't model for them yourself. So I would say don't be fearful of modeling. Your kids are absolutely learning at that elementary school level is especially important, but include the students in the conversation. So as you're doing things that you might perceive that's for them, just speak out loud and vocalize what you're doing. And whether you think they're listening or not, they are listening and they're watching you. And when you turn around, they are trying to do that same thing because modeling is that powerful. So I wouldn't be fearful of that and model away.
Good. I have 2 more.
Okay.
Michelle asks, do you work with ADHD parents and grandparents to help them do some of these things you're speaking of when they have these problems themselves?
So in a limited fashion, we do. I can't tell you how many times. You're not going to find it on our website, but I can't tell you how many times I walk into a house and a mom says, I have 4 kids that go to 3 different schools and they each do 1 or 2 sports. And do you do some of this calendaring stuff and planning stuff, like just is fantastic. Is there any way that you can work with me, and we do a limited amount of that. My priority is the kiddos, but absolutely, now with a team as big as we have, we certainly do some limited work with with parents as well. And I would not exclude grandparents either. So based on availability, and it's got to be a really good fit, and we need to have a really good idea of what you're trying to accomplish, because I always want kind of a goal in mind that's specific. SMART goals is still what we do with our kids, and so I want to make sure that we have a specific objective in mind, but as long as that's clear and we have the availability for it, that is interesting to us, and we can do that kind of work as well.
That's great. I have one more, and it looks like it's going to be perfect timing here for one more. Our 5th grade boy is learning virtually, has ADHD and dyslexia. Mondays are rough because he sees the work for the week and feels overwhelmed and anxious. What could we do to make Mondays less painful?
To make Mondays less painful, I would say you need to identify all the things that are painful that you mentioned just now about Mondays, and see how many of those things, some will not be possible, but how many of those things can you start on early? Do you have to procrastinate until Monday to do all of those things? Some of them are Monday driven, but some of those things that you mentioned, you can work on the weekend before, or you can work on at the end of the previous week, and you can tie, healthy positive and negative reinforcement systems at home are very important. And your counselor at school would be happy to make time to talk to you about that. If you need more time than that, therapists, a couple sessions with a therapist, and they can help you come up with some healthy positive and negative reinforcement systems. But I would recommend making a list of all those things that contribute to a stressful Monday, and then starring those things that don't have to necessarily be done or wait until Monday, and spread those out over the previous days, so that Mondays are less stressful. Another tip that we have is I don't recall the entire list of things that stress you out about Mondays, but some kids are morning people and some kids are evening people, and so we encourage kids to make lists. I'm a list lover, and so we encourage kids to make lists. And if a kid functions better and is happier and has less of an attitude, talking about teenagers here, in the evening times, then we make that list pretty heavy in the evening time. So for example, it might be check your email, check your planner, plug in all your devices, pick out your clothes for the next day, put all of your schoolwork back in your backpack, put your backpack by the door or in the car, even better, and just stack that list in the evening. And then keep that list for the morning just down to 3 things, get dressed, brush your teeth, eat toast, like just keep those lists in the morning very short. So you can have that kind of same approach, I think, for Mondays, and maybe move some of those things to the days prior would be my recommendation.
It seems to me like a lot of what you're saying too is trial and error. We got to try this, and if it works, great. And if it doesn't, you massage it and adapt, as you said earlier, and make it different. You've really given us so many specifics, which is also part of your game plan, is be specific and clear. And I think that's been especially helpful. We're going to, this has been recorded, and we will put it, and we're creating a library under the parent pages of the Neuhaus website. So we can link this video. It'll be a few days if we get it there, but we'll link it so that you can hear it again to pick up on the things that you want to hear again. We really appreciate it, Evan, and appreciate your availability. We're able to access your newsletter and your information, and I know many of these parents and the teachers will want to refer their parents to your organization for helping kids not just with their homework, but how to learn and to get it done. So thank you so much for being here. I want to also tell you that if you have a high school student, or you might eventually have a high school student, we're going to have our college share program for the fall on Monday evening. And I did say evening, from 7 to 8:30 this coming Monday, October 5th. Our good friend Amir Barr is back by popular demand to talk to high school students and their parents about the synergy of technology and dyslexia. his message is about success also, in his success and children's success in this virtual world. So thanks again to Evan. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your continuing support. We hope you have a wonderful day. Till next time.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Evan.